Hey there, geography students. This is Mr. Everton, obviously, and this is your second screencast, your first for week 2. Sorry, I got my coffee. And it's all about international cooperation, as you can see from the screen. So last time we began reviewing some of the concepts under the economic heading. Today we're going to continue to do that, but we're also going to add some concepts from the political heading as we talk about ways that different countries work together to solve problems. And that can take, the form of economic cooperation or political cooperation. So we're going to start off with economic cooperation. And we talked about this last video, but it's important to recognize that NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, is an example of economic cooperation. This, of course, as we said last time, is creates free trade between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. And there's no tariffs, which means no taxes on exports and imports between these three countries, which means that American car companies can build factories in Mexico and Mexican workers can make the cars. And then without any kind of tax on them, they can move into the United States where they can be bought by American consumers. And the price is lower because of free trade. So that's an example of international cooperation in an economic way. Another example is the European Union. Let me see if I can get this thing to move. I don't know that I can. Well, it's a little bit better. So the European Union, as we discussed in class, is also it's economic and it's political. It involves 27 European countries, which you can see pictured here. It used to include the United Kingdom, but recently they exited. Brexit, we talked about that in class as well. All of these countries gave up some of their sovereignty, which means some of their ability to decide what happens to their country. They gave up some of their control over their own country and accepted some shared rules and shared policies that all countries in the European Union accept. And some of these rules create free trade between the countries of Europe so that one country, if you're in Spain and you want to buy and sell things in France, there's no tax on that, just like we talked about with NAFTA. And there's free movement, so you don't have to you don't have to stop and get your passport checked and have all of your things gone through when you move from one country to the next. It allows you to move more easily from one country to another. Before the European Union, this is a snapshot of what European money used to look like. France had its own money called the franc. Germany had the Deutschmark. Italy, Spain, all of these countries had their own currency. And if you were in that country, you would be buying and selling things using that currency, and you'd go to a bank or get your money changed over. And you can see that this money all features the faces of a famous French person. I should have looked that guy's name up. Come on, Everton, get it together. Anyway, now, if you're in Europe and you're in a European Union country, all of the money is euros. You buy and sell things in euros, which makes it a lot easier. It makes it a lot easier to move from one place to the next. And it's one way in which European countries are cooperating in this system. Another example of economic cooperation internationally is OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, which is 14 different oil-producing nations. We talked about this when we talked about Southwest Asia because that's where most of these countries are located, but it includes other countries too, like Venezuela and Nigeria, countries that make a lot of their money by exporting oil. And these countries work together to try to regulate the global price of oil and keep the price of oil stable. They don't want it to be too expensive, and they don't want it to be too cheap. It's in their interest to keep the price of oil relatively under control. We're going to talk now about some political cooperation. The major example of political cooperation that I want to talk about is the United Nations. And the United Nations, we've talked about repeatedly in our class. It's basically like a big government of governments, right? All the countries of the world come together in New York City, though one imagines not in this moment. Sorry, that was actually a throat clear, not an ironic throat clear. They come together in New York City and they try to work out problems between each other and try to make decisions and try to cooperate to make the world, a better place. That sounds a little hokey, but it's not. There's the General Assembly, which you can see pictured on top, which every country in the world that is part of the UN participates in the General Assembly. And then the Security Council is a smaller group of more powerful, wealthier countries with like a rotating cast of smaller, less wealthy countries that participate in the Security Council. The UN, part of the UN, is particularly relevant right now is the World Health Organization, which responds to world health emergencies. If you've been following stuff about the coronavirus in the news, you might have heard the WHO or World Health Organization referred to. You can see the current head of the World Health Organization pictured here. The World Health Organization has been responsible since the UN was founded for trying to deal with diseases around the world. In 1977, the World Health Organization was responsible for completely getting rid of or eradicating the disease smallpox from the world. And here you can see some World Health Organization officials in Ethiopia checking out this little girl, helping to make sure that smallpox was no longer a disease. So, no longer a disease, no longer present in the world. So it has a long history of dealing with illnesses around the world. Then there's UN peacekeepers, which sometimes get called blue helmets or blue berets. A beret is the hat that you can see these people wearing. They also sometimes wear helmets, obviously. And these are soldiers and police, usually from many different countries that are soldiers and police in their own country, but they get sent to work with the UN, and they go into places that are experiencing conflict, and they try, particularly right after the conflict is over, and they try to create some stability. So like after a civil war ends, you need troops to come in and try to like reestablish order. That's what the blue helmets are for, UN peacekeepers. The UN also tries to measure the development in different countries, and we talked about this. The Human Development Index looks at a variety of factors like what the economy is like, what the GDP, the average lifespan, the child mortality rate, education in the country, and they take all of those figures together and they create something called the HDI, or Human Development Index, and they rate countries based on how developed they are. You can see here that the darker the country is, the more developed it is, and the less developed it is, the brighter the color orange or red is. And we've talked about this in our class, that Europe and North America are the most developed places in the world typically, and that sub-Saharan Africa is the least developed. And we talked about how that is part of the legacy of colonization and imperialism, that the reason why it's like that is because Europeans colonized the world and harvested its natural resources, and Africa is still recovering from that. Finally, the last example I want to talk about of international cooperation is the International Red Cross and Red Crescent. Now, you might have heard of the Red Cross before. There's the American Red Cross, for example, and these are organizations that provide medical help for people in emergencies and natural disasters. These are people who provide people with food, provide people with medicine, provide people with healthcare that they need when something really when there's an emergency, when something terrible happens, like when there was an earthquake in Haiti, or when Hurricane Maria decimated Puerto Rico. That's when the International Red Cross and Red Crescent, or the IFRC, is people from that organization go in and provide people with emergency relief. Here you can see the people of the International Red Cross and Red Crescent organizing boxes of food in Syria to give to people in Syria during the Syrian civil war. By the way, it's called the Red Cross and Red Crescent because the Red Cross, obviously, originally was founded as the Red Cross in Switzerland. And that's like a Christian symbol, right? The cross. But, in Muslim countries, majority Muslim countries, like in Southwest Asia, like in Syria, the crescent is a symbol of Islam. And so, in those countries, they use the Red Crescent as a symbol, to make it more culturally, responsive to the people who live there. Okay, so for today's activity, there is a Newsella article on Canvas for you to read, and you're going to click the link to the Newsella article. You need to make sure before you do this that you are logged in to Newsella with your school Gmail account. And then you're going to have to go back to Canvas and you're going to have to click the link again. So the first time you go to Newsella, you're going to be logging in with your Gmail account. Then you're going to go back to Canvas and you're going to click the link to the Newsella article, which is called Pan-African Movement Promotes Economic and Political Cooperation. And then in Canvas, you're going to click the link to answer questions about the article. And that is your lesson for today. I hope everybody's doing well, and I will talk to you next time.